Dad, perfect revenge. She canceled my credit card at 8 in the morning. By 8 that night, she found out exactly who she just made that mistake with. My name is Gerald Caldwell. I'm 67 years old. I want to tell you what happened at my son's Thanksgiving dinner, because I think a lot of men my age have been in a version of that room, sitting at the end of the table, watching someone smile while they dismantle your life and call it help. I'm not a complicated man. I worked with my hands for 30 years. I raised my son alone after my wife passed. I wore the same gray flannel shirt to 3 different family dinners, and nobody said anything because nobody thought I was worth dressing for. That was fine. I was busy doing other things. Randall's house sits in a quiet suburb outside Pittsburgh, one of those neighborhoods where every lawn is the same length and the mailboxes all match. It took him 10 years of steady work to get there, and I was proud of him for it. That Thursday, the driveway was packed. His in-laws' Buick, a cousin's kick-up, a neighbor who got invited for drinks and somehow ended up staying through dessert. Inside, it smelled like turkey and store-bought pie, and someone's perfume working too hard. Football on in the other room, kids running the hallway. Normal Thanksgiving sounds. I arrived at 4. Nadine met me at the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, took my coat without asking, and pointed me toward the far end of the table. Not the head, the other end near the kitchen door, where it's drafty and the chair wobbles. I sat down without saying anything about it. Nadine was 5 months pregnant, glowing the way people say, and she really was, confident, dressed like she was hosting something that would be photographed. She had planned every detail of that dinner, down to the folded napkins and where each person sat. I know that now. I suspected it then. My son Randall, 43 years old, sat beside her. He had the look of a man who'd been agreeing with someone for too long. Not unhappy exactly, just worn down to a shape that wasn't quite his. Dinner moved along. Conversation happened around me more than with me. When I tried to say something about the pirates, Nadine shifted the topic, and the table followed her. Randall watched his plate. I watched everything. Then halfway through the meal, Nadine stood up. She tapped her glass with a spoon. One clean sound. The room went quiet the way it does for people who expect to be listened to. "I just want to say something before dessert," she said. Calm voice. Practice the voice of someone who had run this moment in her head more than once. With a baby coming, Randall and I have done a lot of thinking about responsibility, about structure, about making sure this family is protected going forward. She paused, looked around the table, let it settle. "Starting today, I'll be managing the finances for this family. All of them. We've already taken the first steps." Nods moved around the table. Someone said, "That makes sense. She's organized." Another, "Good. Someone should be in charge." Then she looked at me. "Gerald," she said. First name. Soft voice. The tone people use when they've already made the decision and want it to sound gentle. "We took care of your accounts this morning. Your credit card has been canceled. At your age, you really shouldn't have to manage all that stress. If you need anything, just ask Randall." Randall nodded. He did not look at me. Glasses lifted around the table. A cousin said, "Smart move. Older people get taken advantage of all the time." Another, "That's responsible planning." I looked at my hands, flat on the tablecloth. They were steady. I noticed that and kept it. I set my glass down, stood up slow. My left knee has complained since a job site fall in 2009. I stood straight anyway. I looked at my son, Randall. I said, "You really don't know, do you?" His smile disappeared. The table went quiet again. Different kind of quiet. The kind that comes right before something changes direction, and everyone in the room feels it before they understand it. To explain what happened next, I have to go back almost 30 years. February 1995. Pittsburgh in winter is a specific kind of cold. Comes off the rivers, gets into the buildings, gets into you. Dorothy had been sick for 3 years. Breast cancer, the aggressive kind. She fought it without complaining, without making it the center of every room she walked into. That was her way. Quiet stubbornness. I loved that about her from the beginning. She died on a Tuesday. Randall was 14. I was 38. I remember the drive home from the hospital, ice on the parkway, going slow. I passed an exit I'd taken 100 times and didn't recognize it for a second. My brain was running on something other than thinking, just keeping the car on the road. One exit at a time, I kept thinking. Get home before Randall gets back from school. Get home. Get your face right. Figure out what to say. That was the only goal. Not grief, not the future. Just get home and be upright when he walks through the door. He was already there, sitting at the kitchen table. Peanut butter sandwich in front of him. No jelly, the way he'd always had it. He looked up and said, "Is she gone?" I said yes. He nodded, took a bite of his sandwich. I sat across from him. Neither of us said much. Dorothy had been the one who made conversation easy. Without her, Randall and I were just 2 quiet people in a house that had gotten too large and too still overnight.
The bills started arriving the following week. Hospital costs, funeral expenses, a second mortgage notice. Dorothy and I had refinanced 3 years earlier to cover her first round of treatment, and the payments didn't stop because she did. Then a letter from the union hall saying my hours at the industrial plant were being cut due to a contract restructure. 3 envelopes in 1 week. I sat at the kitchen table that Saturday night with all 3 letters spread out in front of me, and a cup of coffee that went cold while I read them. Randall was asleep down the hall. The house was quiet. The furnace clicked on and off. Outside, snow was coming down slow and steady the way it does in Pittsburgh in February, like it has nowhere to be and all the time in the world. I sat there for a long time. Then I made a decision. The only real decision I think I've ever made in my life. I was not going to fall apart. Not because I didn't have the right to. I had every right. But Randall needed someone upright, and I was the only candidate left. So I picked up the letters, stacked them neatly, put them in a folder, and went to bed. One thing at a time, starting tomorrow. I was an electrician. Industrial work, load panels, 3-phase systems, the wiring that runs factories and warehouses. It wrecks your sleep and puts calluses on your hands, and some of the fume exposure you don't want to think about too hard. But I was good at it. I understood how systems failed, and how to make them reliable again. What I didn't understand was money beyond a paycheck. That changed because of a man named Clyde Hutchkins. About 6 months after Dorothy passed, I took a Saturday job at a warehouse in Monteville. A loading dock panel had shorted out, and nobody would touch it because the previous electrician had wired it badly and left something that looked dangerous behind. It was dangerous. I fixed it in 4 hours, traced the fault back to a corroded junction box that should have been replaced 3 years earlier, rewired the downstream connections, and tested everything twice before I packed up my tools. Clyde owned the building. He was 63, retired from running logistics for a regional distribution company, and he watched me work the entire time without saying a word. When I finished, he said, "You don't just fix the problem, you figure out what caused it." We talked for 2 hours in that parking lot. Cold afternoon, neither of us moved to leave. Clyde told me how he bought his first property, a storage building near Turtle Creek that had a compromised roof and a drainage problem nobody wanted to deal with. He bought it cheap because of those 2 things. Fixed the roof himself over 4 weekends, fixed the drainage over 2 more, rented it to a machine parts supplier on a 2-year lease, used that income to cover a loan on his second property, repeated the process. He explained depreciation schedules, LLC structures, how to read a commercial lease from both sides of the table at the same time, how the best properties weren't the ones that looked good, they were the ones with solvable problems that everyone else was walking away from, because most people couldn't solve them, and you could. He didn't offer me money, didn't offer to partner. He just talked the way experienced men sometimes talk to younger ones when they see something worth not wasting. I listened the way I'd learned to listen on job sites, not reacting, just taking it in. I drove home that night and wrote down everything he'd said on a legal pad, both sides, small handwriting. 6 months later, I bought my first property, a narrow commercial unit in Swissale, one of those Pittsburgh neighborhoods that used to be industrial and was now just tired and waiting. The unit had been vacant for 14 months. The listing had expired twice. Roof leaked in 2 places. Back door had warped in its frame and wouldn't close right. And the previous tenant had left behind broken equipment, a busted floor drain, and a smell that took 3 weeks of ventilation to clear out. I paid $31,000 for it. Private loan through a small credit union where the branch manager knew my work history and could verify my union wages. The terms weren't ideal, but they were workable if I got a tenant in at the right number. I fixed it myself nights after shifts, Saturdays, the occasional Sunday when Randall had something going on at school and the house was empty. I rewired the entire panel, patched the roof over 2 cold weekends in March, working with shingles that went brittle in the temperature and hands that stiffened up after an hour. Fixed the drain, painted the interior with a roller and a $40 tray from the hardware store. Repaired the back door frame with wood filler and 2 replacement hinges that cost me $8 total. Randall was 15 that year. Some Saturdays he'd come out to the unit and hand me tools without being asked. We'd work a few hours without talking much. I'd buy him a burger on the way home. That was about the shape of us those years. Not distant, just quiet. 2 people who showed up for each other without needing to announce it. 4 months after the purchase, I rented the unit to a small auto parts distributor on a 24-month lease at $1,400 a month. Covered my loan payment with $210 left over every month. I remember sitting on the concrete floor of that unit the night before the tenant moved in. Bare walls, one overhead light buzzing faintly. Cold coming through the repaired doorframe. I sat there maybe 20 minutes without thinking about much, just sitting in something I'd built from a problem nobody else wanted to solve. I thought about Dorothy. She would have called me stubborn. Then she would have told me to eat something and get some sleep. The second unit came 18 months later. Braddock, another post-industrial neighborhood. Another building with solvable problems. $44,500. Foundation drainage issue, 2 windows needing replacement, electrical upgrade. Rented to a contractor supply company at $1,800 a month. Then the third, then the fourth. In 2008, I formed the Caldwell Industrial Holdings LLC with the help of a Pittsburgh attorney named Floyd Mercer, recommended by a union colleague. Methodical, not a man who wasted words. Floyd restructured my ownership, reviewed my leases, and advised me to keep my personal finances entirely separate from the LLC. I did. By then, I owned 4 properties, generating steady income. My name barely appeared in public records. I still worked union jobs, still drove the same truck, still wore the same clothes. Randall graduated college that year. He thought he'd gotten a Churchill scholarship. The balance had been paid through a trust account he'd never seen. He thanked me for helping with groceries during exam week. I said, "You did the work," which was true. The 5th property, a commercial storage complex in eastern Ohio near the Pennsylvania line, came in 2012. Portfolio by then, $2.84 million combined valuation. Net rental income averaging $22,000 a month. I retired in 2017 because my knee finally gave me a legitimate reason to stop. I never told Randall any of it. Not because I was ashamed, because I'd watched what happened to men who knew money was coming. How it made them wait instead of build, expect instead of earn. I wanted Randall to work because he had to make decisions because they mattered, to become the kind of man who would have been fine either way. He became that man, until Nadine started quietly rewriting the story. I met Nadine for the first time at a cookout Randall threw in the summer of 2014. She was 24, sharp, quick to laugh at the right moments. She had the kind of social intelligence that looks like warmth until you've watched it operate long enough to see what it actually is. Reading the room, calculating responses, deciding who matters and who doesn't before the introductions are finished. She shook my hand, called me Mr. Caldwell, and spent about 5 seconds scanning my living room before she had me filed away somewhere in her mental categories. I recognized the move because it's what I did too, just with buildings instead of people. They married in 2016. I gave them a check that covered 3 months of mortgage payments, framed as a home repair fund. No strings, no conditions. The shift started maybe a year into the marriage, subtle enough that I almost missed it. Randall called less, not dramatically, just the difference between weekly and every 2 weeks, then once a month. When I brought it up, he said Nadine was tired, work was busy, life was full. All reasonable explanations. I let it go. Then came what I came to think of as the concern offensive. Nadine started asking questions that sounded like herring. Did I have a plan for the future? Was I managing okay on my own? Had I looked into senior financial planning services? Were my accounts set up properly in case something happened to me? Randall repeated versions of these questions when we talked in slightly different words. The phrasing was close enough to hers that it stopped sounding like his own thinking. He started showing up at my house with printed articles about financial scams targeting retirees, all of them highlighted in yellow. He'd set them on my